buying more guns, and he wants less. Which is weird because his job requires him to actively, fight against cops. Or did.
Legal aid.
Yeah.
Shout out to Legal Aid.
Yeah,
Great work.
Yeah.
Shout out to Legal Defenders. Shout out to a friend of mine, Sam McCann. He worked for Legal Defender.
Was he cool? The legal aid guy that he shouted out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cooler than you.
No, a lot of people are cooler than me.
Whoa.
It's not saying much.
I think you're equally cool.
No, it's fine.
Rank choice cool.
Yeah.
Like room for
I'm
more.
cooler than Alex. That's what matters.
That doesn't mean anything.
What about, there's a couple tougher issues, I think, to broach here.
Oh, God. Where are we going?
I'm not joking anymore. So
Okay.
it's I would say 3 things that I want to talk to you about before we let you go, or rather, I think we're going to walk around a little bit too, right? If you want to do that.
I'm down.
1, immigration. Governor of the state of Texas, Greg Abbott, and even Ron DeSantis shipped in what I think would be considered a human trafficking scheme a bunch of undocumented migrants into the state of New York, specifically to New York City, and Chicago as well, in an effort to deliberately disrupt the processing of undocumented migrants that had legal asylum claims, and in an effort to basically undermine the federal structure that already existed in this country. And unfortunately, they did find much success. But I think, especially in a place like New York, the reason why they were able to find success is because of the mishandling of this administration, or the Biden administration, but specifically with Eric Adams. Instead of tackling the problem head on, saying that New York is comprised almost entirely of migrants, that America is a nation of immigrants, and that New York specifically is one of the most diverse places on the planet, and then showing through his work of welcoming the undocumented migrants and processing them, or working with the government to process them expeditiously, I feel like Eric Adams slapped on a Band-Aid solution and then basically conceded on the messaging front that migrants were responsible for a lot of the visible poverty that people see, and also even the crime that people are experiencing. There's no evidence to suggest that, as far as I know. Maybe in New York it's different, but overall, undocumented migrants are not responsible for a large share of the crimes. As a matter of fact, they're responsible for less crime per capita than natural-born U.S. citizens are. And yet, this message has persisted. And I think it's one that became, it's one that even New Yorkers themselves adopted, from what I saw. How would you deal with this issue? Like, let's say you were the mayor of New York at that time. What would you have done?
I think the first thing is I wouldn't demonize people that are coming to New York City to call this city their home. And we saw this mayor say that migrants were destroying our city. And you have what's been described as the second largest bully pulpit in America as the mayor of this city. And you're using it to turn the target onto a set of individuals that are in the most need of this city's assistance. And it is something that has led to not only an anti-immigrant sentiment across the city, but even violence against a number of New Yorkers, our newest neighbors. And this isn't just a story of cruelty or a story of demonization and demagoguery. It's also one of patronage politics. You had one of Eric Adams' closest advisors on record saying, "Where are my crumbs?" when it came to the contracts that were being handed out for migrant shelters. You have a city run by Eric Adams that issued a more than $400 million contract, no bid contract, to a company called DocGo. So it's not just a question of cruelty, it's not just a question of bigotry, it's also a question of an immense amount of money being made with few services to name actually being delivered. And in the critiques that had to be made of how the Biden administration was responding to New York City's needs, Eric Adams was on his way to D.C. to make the case and then turned back because his major fundraiser of his campaign was having her house raided by the feds. So you cannot have an effective leader who is not actually focused on delivering on these kinds of issues when their number one priority is keeping themselves and their close associates out of jail.
In terms of hardline policies, though, like what are some of the things that you saw that Eric Adams did that you thought were bad, and what would you have done differently?
All right, so let me rattle off a few. The first is the 30 and 60-day shelter limits that he put in place, forcing them to be evicted out of shelters that were providing them with that. And my office actually worked with more than 1,000 asylum seekers over the last year, partnering with a local organization called Medica, where we would assist asylum seekers with applying for city services like a reduced fare Metro card or a New York City ID. And what we found is that we would see our own clients sleeping on subway platforms who had previously been sleeping on in shelters. It did nothing for addressing any of the stated reasons, but what it was is just cruel. The second thing is we have a sanctuary city policy in New York City when it comes to immigration. We have a policy that we should be proud of, one that has survived under decades of bipartisan leadership of this city that Eric Adams has now chosen to demonize. And the city's policy is that it will not allow ICE agents into city schools, hospitals, properties, even properties of city contractors, unless they provide a judicial warrant signed by a judge. Now, I serve on the city's committee in the assembly in Albany, and I get 3 minutes every year to question the mayor. I asked him, would you follow this policy? Will you clarify for New Yorkers that this is the law? He refused to answer it. So what I would also do is establish 100% compliance with that law and establish an oversight commission to ensure that that compliance is being followed even by city contractors. Because the absence of it...
What if you were being blackmailed by the administration because you did a pay-for-play scheme with a foreign government where in order for cheap travel or greatly discounted travel to Turkey, you ended up offering a bunch of amenities, and then you got investigated by the federal government, but then the federal government exchanged hands, and the new government decided, we are going to bring ICE into all of these facilities, into your schools, into Rikers, and you said, oh, great, if you drop my case, I will play ball with you. What about in a situation like that?
That's
not totally hypothetical.
Totally hypothetical. Not sure who you're speaking about, but that would never actually happen to me. And I think that's another concern that we also have with Andrew Cuomo is, there are issues hanging over his head that New Yorkers have a right to be concerned about as to whether it'll impact the way in which he governs this city. And what's so...
No female security detail.
I mean, it's honestly, it's also just so infuriating to be in the Democratic Party and position ourselves as being in stark contrast to the sexual harassment and assault that we have seen endemic in so many Republican leaders, and then offer a contrast in Andrew Cuomo, someone who's been credibly accused by more than 10 women of sexual harassment, and to say that this is just the way politics is going to be, then you obviously end up with the way that people feel a sense of despair.
Yeah, Democrats do definitely have a hypocrisy problem. Well, for two reasons. One, because they do sometimes care about at least being called a hypocrite, whereas Republicans do not. They are unblackmailable in that regard. But also, on top of that, they do sometimes follow through on addressing some of these issues, but then whenever push comes to shove and they feel like there's a powerful person that's about to get into a role, they quickly forget about their past sexual misconduct allegations. But there's more to Andrew Cuomo. Since you're no longer just running against Eric Adams, but also now running against Andrew Cuomo as well, let me ask you this. If given the opportunity, how much Medicaid would you cut from underserved and impoverished state hospital programs, specifically to kill the working poor? Because that's what Andrew Cuomo did, so I'm just trying to figure out, because I feel like that's a qualification to run for
seemingly the qualification is a complete disregard for working people at every level.
But what if COVID strikes, and then in that process you already underfunded the medical system of New York, and then people, like a lot of old people, die in the process?
In this scenario, is this person also getting a $5 million book deal